Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Airdomo Global, your weekly guide to the world's most compelling real estate markets. I'm Stephanie Gilezan.
And I'm Charles Bornheimer. And to kick things off, Stephanie, we can picture them. There's two beautiful peaks coming out of the sea. You've seen the postcard. This same island, it sells citizenship for about the price of a condo. What are we talking about?
We're talking about the only place anywhere named after a female. Can you all believe it? It's Saint Lucia, an island in the Caribbean. And the two peaks are the pitons. And they're the reason most people know all about this island. St. Lucia also sells citizenship. $240,000 into a government fund makes you a citizen. Really. I mean, that's roughly what a one-bedroom cost at the north end of the island. So it's a postcard island quietly running a second business. So what I tell a buyer before either of those is that St. Lucia is two markets, not one. The north earns, so if that's where you want to go and have some rental income, but then the south is the view. The south is overlooking places like St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So if you pick the wrong one, it's the most expensive mistake you'll make here, but it's still awesome and gorgeous, whichever place you go.
Yeah. So there's three parts we'll talk about today. Then up in the north, there's Cap Estate and Rodney Bay. South, Soufriere and Marigot Bay. We'll cover the tax, the ownership, the passport issues, and a significant change in March. We'll talk about that as well. But before we get going, if you are looking in St. Lucia, been to St. Lucia, have anything interesting along the way that's happened with you or your search, mention it in the chat. We'd love to start the conversation there and hear about what you found. But let's kick this off by looking at the foundation. Every island seems to claim that it hasn't overbuilt, that it's the right amount of growth. But here's a little bit different, right, Steph?
Yeah, because look, every island out there says it hasn't, but in St. Lucia, it's actually written down. Everywhere else, that's a line a developer feeds you across the deck. I've said it a million times, right? It means nothing the day the next project gets approved down the road. But here's the protection that's in St. Lucia. 2 years ago, the government tightened it. Nobody tightens a law they're planning to ignore. That's the difference. So scarcity, somebody promises you, can evaporate. Scarcity in a statute, though, has to be repealed. And so that's what St. Lucia did. A lot of islands talk about it, but they actually put it into law. So it is where, the island is what it is. You're not going to see a whole lot of new development going on in most parts. And the areas designated for new development, you know exactly where they are, and you're not going to expect it anywhere else.
And the pitons, which you mentioned, sit inside a designated environmental protection area. That's under a Physical Planning and Development Act of 2001. In 2024, the government made the design limits there binding regulations. So the enforcement is not universal or perfect, but it is a lot stronger than you see in most markets. And there are international monitors that kind of keep track of that as well. So who of buyers and lifestyle seekers and so forth, who does this really reward?
Well, St. Lucia wants to reward the buyers who actually want to come and use the place. You don't have to come and use it full time, okay? You can earn on it while you're gone, but they want you to come and they want you to be a part of it during some part of time, okay? So they're not going to reward the flippers, all right? If you're a flipper, St. Lucia's not really going to be that for you. So nobody's doubling their money here in 18 months. And anybody telling you otherwise is selling you, a bunch of smoke. What you get instead is a home, a management company that keeps booked through the season. Income is landing in your account from another country, and you have an asset that moves on tourism and limited land. So it's a slower story than most markets tell you, but because of the protection and the limitation on development, you can be assured that, one day this development is gone, right? And so, they can only build so much. There is only going to be so many houses. There's only going to be so many condos. So you have nowhere to go but up.
Well, let's look at the markets one at a time, starting at the busy end, which is relative. It's busier than the rest of the island, but probably not as much as you might expect from other islands. Cap Estate, Rodney Bay, the northern tip. Why does the north tend to come up first in most conversations?
So the north at St. Lucia is where I'd send anyone making that first purchase on this island. Cap Estate and Rodney Bay are the most built out corner. Okay. So some people hear that as a downside, but look, if you want to go shopping, if you want the restaurants, the marina, the golf, that is what is there. And so are the management companies that are going to run your rental when you're somewhere else, right? You're not building any of it from scratch. You're buying into something that already exists. So for a first purchase overseas, that's a difference between a property you enjoy and a property, you can fight with.
Yeah, and that's where for Airdomo we have the most inventory. I'd say we have entry at a one-bedroom condo at Gate Peak at 250K, walking distance to Pigeon Island. From there, it goes to the resort villas, millions. What does the north do that the south can't? You say?
So the north is the only part of St. Lucia where a property can pay for itself while you're not in it. Rental demand up there isn't something you have to go and create. Okay. The honeymooners are already coming. The managed programs already exist, and September isn't, dead the way it is across a lot of the region. You hand over the keys and you get a statement. That's most of what people are really buying in Cap Estate. Whether or not they'd say it that way, if you want the shortest path, from the closing table to income to get your money back on this property, that's going to be the place you go. There's not as many resorts in St. Lucia as some of the other islands. And so, the short-term rental market is big here.
Right. Well, let's look at the other end now. Soufriere on the southwest coast under the Pitons, low density by intent, and the protection is also strongest here. What is the picture down south that's different from up north?
So Soufriere is the other St. Lucia. Look, our partners in St. Lucia, who I've gotten to know so well, they work in one part of St. Lucia and they don't even go in the other part. It's like two separate countries almost, okay? It's where the island keeps its most photographed and most protected real estate. And it is completely a different purchase from the north, okay? Like I said, real estate specialists, they either sell in the north or they sell in the south, but hardly any of them mix. So down there, you're buying the view, you're buying the privacy, and you're buying the exclusivity in the land around you. Rental income mostly is going to go away because it would be so outrageous to rent these properties, by the night. Not to say it doesn't happen, it just stops being the reason that you're buying there. But what you get instead is a setting that nobody can build out from under you, right? Because the same rules that protect the pitons protect what you're looking at. So for a certain buyer, that isn't a compromise. It's the entire reason they came to St. Lucia. So, the Powerball's $1 billion, I think, today, if anybody wins, and that's the part of St. Lucia that you would go and spend that in, right?
That's definitely where I'm heading. Yeah, that's when that Powerball comes in for me today.
Yeah.
So with the access, let's talk about access. It's getting better. Hewanora in Viewport is the main airport. There's a redevelopment underway there, and it's about half done, or the parts of it are about half done. There's a new terminal in 2029. One more corner to talk about. What about Marigot Bay?
So Marigot Bay pairs a working harbor with an actual neighborhood, and there aren't many of those left in the Caribbean, okay? Missioner called it the most beautiful bay in the entire region, and 60 years later, people still buy there on strength of that one sentence, okay? Between Soufriere and Marigot, you're looking at the half of St. Lucia you buy for the view first and the income second. So this is the end people fall in love with on a Tuesday and then spend 6 months justifying it. Most of them get there eventually. If you're ever on a cruise and you pull into St. Lucia, this is where you're pulling into St. Lucia. If you live on St. Lucia and you're buying through Amazon, this is where your Amazon is coming through. So you're the closest to it. But it's a mix. It's not where a lot of the tourists are going to stay. but you will have some of that rental. So it's a mix. It's not the extreme like the South, but it's not as good as the North rental income. It's the middle.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about actually owning there, and let's talk about the rules for the foreign buyer. What do our viewers need to know about that?
Well, owning in St. Lucia as a foreigner is about as clean as this region gets, okay? You hold title in your own name. It runs on English common law, and you get the same rights as any of the local buyers have. There's no local partner to take on. There's no trust structure. You don't have to invent anything, okay? But there is one extra step, and it's a license that your attorney is going to file in working with us, and it's totally routine, okay? Anyone who's bought in North America or Great Britain will recognize the paperwork. There's nothing strange to that. What this license does is it enables them to really run a background check. St. Lucia prides itself on, not having any of this money laundering or criminal activity. And they don't want to allow you in if you've got some funny business about you. And so I think it's a great thing that they do that, because you know that when you're investing there, that your neighbors are safe.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that license is called the Alien Land Holding License. It's as simple as having your attorney file it. And as you mentioned, we can help you build that team, get that crew together to get you painlessly through the whole process. Most closings are 60 to 90 days. Residential property tax is 0.25% a year. There's one piece that sometimes goes unnoticed. Although a non-resident seller pays 10% on the way out. How does that factor into the math?
Well, so the 10% non-resident pays on the way out of St. Lucia is the number that I would want in front of me before buying anything there, okay? Look, it doesn't break the case because there's no capital gains tax. You're not going to have an inheritance tax sitting underneath you, okay? But what it does tell you is exactly which buyer this island is built for. So if you're planning to sell in 3 years, that exit cost eats a real share of whatever you made. So it's 10% of that sales price. So if you're holding for 20 and handing it to your kids, it barely registers. So St. Lucia prices out of the short-term buyer, but it keeps you there for the long hold.
Now, let's talk about what people ask pretty commonly about this. You gave the fund number at the top. The other route is the approved real estate, 300,000. Held for 5 years. It has to be a government approved project. But there was a change in March. Can you tell us about that?
So on March 5th, the UK put a visa requirement on every St. Lucian passport holder, including transit through British Airport. So CARICOM, that didn't change. So the passport still works. It just works in fewer places than it did in February. So everyone selling you that St. Lucia without is like last year's island. There's a second thing to look at here. At minimum, you're not choosing a villa off of a listing page. You're buying into a government-approved project with your money sitting in escrow, and that approved list is short. And so what we want to do is make sure we're investigating that. Look, most developers are not going to develop a property without getting it government approved, but then you always run into slight issues, right? Where you have developers advertising the wrong thing. That's where we come in, because we want to make sure that we go through those proper channels. Also, if a home hasn't been approved for citizenship, we can help through that process. We can walk that home through the process to get it approved, and you can arrive at that together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's relatively straightforward, but you never want to go in blindfolded. So get the team together, and of course, Airdomo is great at helping with that. But let's put it together, everything we've covered, and compare it to some of the places we've been talking about in the last few weeks. Where does St. Lucia land in the mix?
Well, St. Lucia earns its place by asking the buyer to give up very, very little. The legal system behaves the way you would expect it to. The island protects the thing that you're paying for. There's a passport option sitting on top if you want one. Most markets in this region hand you one of those three and ask you to live without the others, but St. Lucia asks for one thing back, and that's patience. They say, come and enjoy and don't leave us in 18 months. Okay. So this is not a fast market. It's never pretended to be a fast market. Hopefully, if you're going to take the time to find the right property in St. Lucia, you're going to want to spend a little bit more than a couple years there anyway. So if you think in decades, very few islands are going to fit you better than St. Lucia.
Yeah, again, and like we said at the top, if you have thought about St. Lucia, have you been there and it's been part of your search or your research, pop it into the chat. Let us know what you like, what's confusing, where you're at. We want to know your stories, help if we can, and start that discussion. So make sure to jump in and start the conversation. Let's go back to the one big question though, north or south. What is the best way for a buyer starting the process to really tell where to go?
Well, the choice in St. Lucia comes down to what you want the property doing while you're not in it, okay? If you want it earning, you buy north to Cap Estate and Rodney Bay. The demand's there. The managers are there. The whole corner runs without you there. If you want it waiting for you, you go south to Soufriere or Marigot Bay, and you accept that it won't work as hard for you on a return on investment. And if the passport is part of that plan, you go in through as an approved project with your eyes wide open about what that passport does for you. And do you even need that passport? Most people find out which one they are about in 10 minutes into the first conversation. I think I've been very honest on these webinars. I love the first one. I love income producing assets when I'm not in them. However, my parents, they love the latter.
Yeah, I think I like getting away from the crowds, but it's hard to turn away from the money. So I don't know where I'd land. I think I gotta go and check out some more of the inventory, and we have a lot of that on our demo today. St. Lucia inventory in both sides worth checking out. Cap Estate, Soufriere, condos through resort villas. Concierge sources for anything that you can't find, we'll find it for you. I can guarantee you that. So it can help you verify the product's status, citizenship status, all of the pieces that you need to put the puzzle together. We're there to help. So Stephanie, what's the last word for folks checking out St. Lucia?
If St. Lucia hasn't been on your list, it should be. And the first thing to get honest about is which St. Lucia you actually want, the condo in Cap Estate that earns or the view in Soufriere that doesn't have to. So go to airdomo.com, look at what is live right now, and talk to our concierge team before you sign anything. The smartest buyers move before the trade is obvious, and St. Lucia has been obvious to British and Canadian buyers for a long time, and it's just now becoming obvious to us here in North America. So it's time to get looking at what we have there. The gap is the only window that ever really matters. So once again, thank you for joining us on Airdomo Global. We'll see you next week with another market, another opportunity. Until then, find your place in the world. Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. We'll find your place on Airdomo, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, all.